All right, we are recording, we are live, and so officially welcome to the final public debrief from EULAR 2022, and I have it a little posted on my wall because they changed their name and I never remember it. It's now European Alliance of Associations for Rheumatology. It used to be something different, but so that's what EULAR stands for, and it is one of two of the biggest rheumatology conferences of the year. International Foundation for Autoinflammatory Arthritis, or AiArthritis for short. That is our organization, and everyone here is either an employee, a volunteer officially, or a part of our Go With Us program. So we have, and you are now part of our Go With Us program because you're here at the debrief. So we try to bring as many people with us as possible when we go to these, because we learn the most cutting edge research. And it's not just about research. We also get a lot of education, and there's a lot about pharma. There's a lot about non-pharma. And last time on the last debrief, we focused a lot on non-pharma. We're going to continue that a little bit today, but then we're going to move into more about precision medicine, and I'll sort of explain what that is. We're going to talk about aging, which honestly was fascinating. We're going to talk about comorbidities, issues with detection and diagnosis, and matching treatments to us based on our individual needs, all kinds of awesome stuff. So first and foremost, I'm just going to say who I am, and then we're going to go around so you know who's on this panel here. So I'm Tiffany Westrich-Robertson, and I am the CEO of the organization and also a person living with the diseases. My original diagnosis was undifferentiated connective tissue disease. Then it went to rheumatoid arthritis. Now it's non-radiographic axial spondy, and also Behçet's disease is on there as well. So I'm sure I'm not uncommon in that. And I'm going to turn it over. But before I do, I just want to tell you, if you're in here and you want to say hello, the chat is open for you. So please, by all means, you can, if you want to, we encourage you to chat, tell us where you're from, your diagnosis. Let's go down. Let's go over to Deb, because it's the first person that I see on my screen. And then Deb, when you're done, pass it over.
I absolutely will. Hi, everybody. I'm Deb Constien. I am I'm living in the Madison, Wisconsin area, and I have had RAs since I was 13 years old, so 40 something years of having this. And I am a retired dietitian, medically retired, not necessarily by choice. And I am longtime volunteer of AiArthritis and a representative, and I will go to my right, which would be Katie.
Thank you. All right, so hi everyone, I'm Katie Simons. I'm the Senior Programs Manager at AiArthritis. I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis 20 years ago this year, so big anniversary here. It's a good excuse to treat myself to something fancy, I guess. And I'm from the Metro Detroit, Michigan area. And then next on my screen, it looks like Eileen. So I'll pass it over to you.
Hi, my name is Eileen Davidson. I'm from Vancouver, BC, Canada. I live with rheumatoid arthritis, diagnosed 7 years ago. I'm known on the internet as Chronic Eileen, my blog title, and I'm a member of the Arthritis Research Canada Patient Advisory Board, plus other patient partner involved in research, and I'm a regular writer with Creaky Joints. I'm gonna go next to Lisa because I don't think I actually know Lisa.
Hi, I'm Lisa Chandler. I live in Western Pennsylvania. I was diagnosed with seronegative arthritis about 20 years ago. Actually, originally I was diagnosed with some sort of autoinflammatory autoimmune arthritis. They didn't know. They basically said some sort of autoimmune arthritis, and then it changed to seronegative. And I've been a longtime volunteer with AiArthritis and a representative. And I will pass it over to Kerry Wong.
Hi, everyone. I am, I'm here in Westchester County, New York. That's about a minute north of the city. And and I am living with a whole slew of conditions. My primary diagnosis, I think, is sarcoidosis. It's a rare immune disease. It's an inflammatory disease that affects pretty much everything. I've also got RA and Sjogren's and a laundry list of other conditions that I have been living with. Let's see, I will just say I've been seeking treatment a little over 10 years. It took about 4 years before doctors would even acknowledge that there was anything wrong with me. Then another 4 years of rotating diagnoses in that autoimmune and autoinflammatory arthritis kind of circle, going through RA, lupus, psoriatic arthritis, all of those things. Still some in question marks up in the air, but basically the best way I can describe it is actually how my rheumatologist described it, is I have my very own flavor of autoimmune soup. And like Deb, I am medically retired, not by choice, but I have been doing as much as I can with a variety of sarcoidosis and arthritis organizations, including lots of different ways with AiArthritis, which I adore. I am also a columnist at Sarcoidosis News. You can find my column. It's called Float Like a Butterfly. You can find me, all of my stuff is Float Like a Butterfly. And I am excited to be here with all of you. And Eileen took my reason. I was going to pass it to Cristina because I also don't know you and haven't met you really before this. But now I also am saving the best for last. And here we go. Off to you, Cristina.
Thank you, Kerry, and hola, everyone. My name is Cristina Montoya. I'm originally from Colombia, but I live in Ontario, Canada. I am a registered dietitian known as the arthritis dietitian, and I live with rheumatoid arthritis and Sjogren's since childhood. And so it's been a long journey, and I'm very pleased to be here and getting to know all of you. And as you can see, Sjogren's hasn't been my friend today. So that's why I'm wearing my dark glasses. So thank you. And I think we're done. I'll pass it on to Tiffany.
Did we go to Katie? And did we
Yeah.
go to
Oh,
Eileen?
yeah,
Yeah, okay, sorry. I was doing all the typing in the so I wasn't looking at that. So funny, Cristina, also the reason that I wear glasses now is they said it wasn't Sjogren's, but it was just, I mean, so dry eye that I literally cannot wear my contacts full time anymore. So I try to as much as I can, but I'm also so close to like legally blind that I need those bifocal contacts, because when I take them off, I put my contacts in, I can't see. I can't see down, I can see far away. So it's like, what's the point? Because if I put them in now, I would have to put my reading glasses on to see anything in the chat. So, oh, the woes of our diseases. They're fabulous, but we understand. And that's the point of what we're doing here today. We understand. So what we like to do at our organization, we implemented this program a couple of years ago, is what's called a pilot program. We do a lot of those at our nonprofit. And what that really means is trial and error. We have an idea. We say, wow, we have a great idea on ways that we as people with lived experience can listen to some pretty complicated conference sessions. It is so hard in some of these to really understand them. They're very high level, very high tech. But then we try to break them down in layman's terms and bring you back the messages that matter most to you and most to us as a community. And that is called our Go With Us to Conferences program. So I put the link in the chat, and our next conference will be the American College of Rheumatology in November. So if you're interested in going with us in a variety of ways, and that's from getting invites to these public debriefs to getting insider videos with us there. We send you little videos of us at events or us in the middle of sessions. I think it's kind of cool. A lot of people on here got those. So definitely check that out. It's free to sign up. So there you go. We're going to jump right in then to continuing this debrief. We will also let you know of all of the links to the prior ones that we have done so that you can catch up with some of them that we've done before. But we're going to jump into, I'm going to frame this with a continuation of personalized versus precision medicine. So I want to explain quickly what that is because it's going to matter as we go through here. So a lot of people will use those terms interchangeably. So it's not globally adopted yet that one is different than the other. However, AiArthritis and several other groups and companies are differentiating. And what the differentiating would be personalized therapies. So if you see personalized medicine, they could be interchangeable, I guess, sometimes with precision, but we're saying personalized therapies, which is non-pharma. So those would be everything else because we are not a one size fits all group by any means. And we need a whole bunch of stuff to help us manage the many manifestations of our diseases. So that's when we're talking about personalized. And we did a lot of that last time, but we're going to actually start today with something in a second here with Cristina and called Beyond Medication, I think was the name of the session. But then when we talk about precision medicine, that is something that has come into our community over the last few years, 3, 4, we've been seeing it at these conferences. It's here in cancer. So cancer is leading the way in precision medicine. I was actually just very excited to announce the first autoinflammatory patient ever to speak at a conference in front of the legislators to put us on the map and us on the table alongside the cancer community. So that just happened. So we're there, guys. And I'm going to tell you a little bit of how more to get involved with that. If you want to have a bigger voice in legislation and getting us access to testing to make sure that we can be matched to the right treatments for us and our unique needs, that's what precision medicine is all about. It's the science, it's our blood, it's our tissue, it's our DNA, our RNA, it's all of these things that make us our own individual signatures. And the research is showing that it can help us with detection and diagnosis, big problem. It can help us with matching treatments to the right, to each of our individual needs, which one will work best with our unique chemistries. Cool, right? It'll also help us with identifying who might have adverse reactions to certain medications or really bad side effects, because that creates a big issue in itself. And then it also, if we can get biomarker testing at the doctor's office, which would mean it would tell us different genetics, different DNA signatures, different proteins, all of these things that make us unique, then if that is the kind of the key to moving this all forward. So all of those things we're going to talk a little bit about today. I'm going to stop and put my mic on, and I'm going to turn it over to Cristina to give us a couple highlights, not a full-on review, but we talked before this, and there's a few really cool things that came out of some studies that she saw, and then the rest of our panelists will be able to weigh in and communicate with Cristina, ask her questions, and you can ask questions in the chat or just add comments as well. Take it away, Cristina.
Thank you, Tiffany. So one of the sessions that I really enjoyed was called Beyond Medication, Self-Management as a Complementary Approach for Treating RMDs. Apparently from a very small country in Europe, which I don't even recall the name. The idea of this program was, it was a group session, and the primary goal of the workshop was for the patients to accept their new reality. That was kind of harsh, but it's true. But I think if we have that understanding and support from the beginning, from when we are diagnosed, I think it would really make a difference. And then, so they structure workshops in which they have 2 professionals and 1 patient leading the workshops for a period of 5 weeks. And it was like run for 2 hours each session. After the meeting, what it was important for them, it was to turn threats into opportunities and get as much of patients involved, in patients' participation in the workshop as much as possible. So they wanted the patients to be involved, to get involved in problem-solving techniques. They wanted them to take baby steps and consider patients' experiences in order to brainstorm ideas on how to overcome those challenges. So even though it was run by two psychologists, they also wanted the patients to lead the way. So they will modify each week according to the patient's experiences. So they might have had like an outline, but they will change it every week just to meet the patient's experiences. So that was really good. The main areas of focus was managing fatigue, sleep, and pain. Some of the areas that they explained was that it was really interesting about giving themselves a grace period, even though they understand the loss, like the grieving process of being diagnosed with long life disease. But they say that it's okay to grieve, but every time you get in hit a fatigue or a flare up, give yourself like a 3-day period to grieve and get up. And I really love that. It's like get yourself a grace period to really reflect on what's going on. But then they had other participants to also encourage each other to say, okay, the 3-day pass, what are you doing? What is something that kind of gets you up and motivated? So I really like that grace period to bounce back. They will also get some give realistic feedback based on the patient's experiences, and they encourage co-sharing decisions with their healthcare providers. That it was about them not feeling afraid to speak up to their healthcare providers, but instead having that co-sharing decision making to make it more real and sustainable. They said that they look for the trainers to be passionate and inspiring. That they found that when the patients are not really inspired, they don't pay attention to any of those workshops, and show them to create a real action plan. What's important about these workshops is to always offer a safe environment for the patients to allow them to show their fears, their challenges, and also their successes. The group dynamics give the patients a feeling of belonging and also allows the patient to become an expert and active patient in their care. So I thought that approach to self-care was very, very well done. And I think that probably an approach that should be maybe implemented more often. Is that any questions?
Hi, yeah, I do have a question. I thought it was really interesting them talking about the 3-day grace period, which I think is really good after you have gone past
Mm-hmm.
the initial deep grief period when you're first diagnosed, because it definitely took me more than 3 days to kind of get over my diagnosis. But that kind of really stuck to me because chronic illness is obviously chronic and life has many ups and downs itself. So we can't always control what happens in our life. So I think that's a great way to kind of, the grace period of giving ourselves 3 days and then pick ourselves back up, because it can be really, really difficult to get back on track when something happens. But did they talk anything about like any behaviors or how long the initial kind of grief period goes on for?
I don't think they were very, no, I don't think they were very specific as to what it takes. I think that they tried to take this approach very close to their beginning of their diagnosis. And so I can't recall, to be honest. I don't think they mentioned. I think they talk about the 3 grace period. I think after, once you get a flare up, not at the beginning stages, but like once you hit this kind of recurring flare ups, that's when you allow yourself that grace period. Because like you said, like the beginning of the process is so individual as to how long it's going to be. But I feel like once you get involved in these groups and everyone is sharing their experiences, that maybe they might not feel alone. And they might be able to maybe that process to shorten instead of being really long, because they're not going to feel isolated. And I think that's what happens to many of us.
I think that's really important, because I know in the beginning of my diagnosis, the first year, I went through a number of emotions of grief, grief, and especially denial. And so for about 6 months, I avoided medications and my rheumatologist. And when I went back with my tail between my legs, like, sorry, I was scared, to my room, and she's like, don't worry, like, this happens to almost all patients, and the fact that you've come back is rare. So I wondered if, did they touch anything on like that behavior at all?
No, I don't think so. They really just went back into explaining how the workshop worked. And
Okay.
so they really they need to work more on the details and the outcomes as they kind of run more workshops.
Yeah, I think then what really needs to be happening is for rheumatologists to offer this right away so that patients don't run away like I did.
Yeah, I
And
think one
I
of the
was just-
conclusions. Oh, sorry, Kerry?
I was just, that's okay. I was going to add, I think, it's so important to have that, mental, emotional support and that sort of the permission to grieve. And I think that it is really, really important to have, as Cristina, you were saying, like rheumatologists bring this to patients as, this is something that we've got to work on. But at the same time, I know that, like, for me personally, when my rheumatologist suggested that I see a therapist, it threw me. I was so floored and so angry and so upset. And the reason for that is not because that wasn't so important and valuable, and I have since come to cherish that, but because, like I said earlier, I spent 4 years of trying to get a diagnosis saying something is wrong. I am experiencing all of these physical symptoms, and doctors looking at me and saying, oh, well, maybe you're just depressed. So 4 years of that is just devastating. And I know that a lot of us, most of us, I think, with autoimmune conditions of any kind, we've gone to doctors who have said, well, you look fine. And we know tons of people who tell us you look fine. And so because I had been traumatized by 4 years of just being dismissed like that, saying it's all in your head, when I finally found a rheumatologist who said, okay, I don't know exactly what it is, but we're going to keep working on it. I know there's something. I was so relieved and felt so validated. And then when she said, I think you should see a therapist, it was like a gut punch, because I was triggered into thinking, does this mean that she doesn't believe I have a real condition and she's just trying to pass me off the same way? And so it was devastating to me, and I fought it for a long time. I eventually came around to it. I said, okay, fine, I will see this woman once just so that I can say that I did, and then I will never see her again. And I have been seeing her for almost 9 years now, and she is one of my favorite people in the world. And even still, she is so valuable in helping me to cope and adapt in all the different ways that my illness affects my life and life period. But I think it's a really, really delicate balance and a delicate space and a really fragile moment for them to figure out exactly how, when, and how to suggest something like that to us without us feeling, while still validating what we're experiencing.
Yes. The whole time you're speaking there, I'm thinking, like, it's so important how they word this. And because my story is very similar. I was diagnosed with clinical depression at 17 by a doctor who was very just kind of, oh, you're depressed, maybe you need to lose weight. And so I kind of hid that for a good 13 or so years before I even addressed that I had depression and did something about it. And it took my RA diagnosis and the grief period to do that. But had somebody said to me and pointed out the fact that depression is part of rheumatoid arthritis, many patients, up to like 2/3 or 1/3, whatever the numbers were, also are experiencing emotional distress from anxiety and depression, I think I would have been more willing and less insulted to have been referred to a therapist, because it would help me understand that it's part of my illness. And because I think we are so worried that we're stuck with, you know, it's an invisible disease, so people think it's all in our head. But I thought, like, when I was participating in studies and there isn't that much talk about more patients having depression, it made me not feel so alone, made me understand how it impacted my disease, and it made me take an initiative to actually treat my depression as well.
I would just to add to that, actually, I wanted to highlight that the therapists or the psychotherapists, they acknowledged that when they first started running their workshops by themselves, they felt that they didn't have the same impact because that was the feeling, right? Like, because now I have something to think about. But once they added the patient expert, they said it just changed the world because everyone could relate to the patients. And they said, oh, if that patient is participating, that means that this is real. So I thought that was very well done. And then she actually acknowledged that was the gap at the beginning. But once the patient got involved, it made a whole difference.
Definitely.
I get that entirely, because I remember when I initially was diagnosed, started the diagnosis process, I went through a couple hoops about for 18 months or so. It was JRA back in the day, juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, then it was lupus, then finally they saw, again, radiographically, all the changes in my joints that they're like, you have full-blown RA and this isn't going away, because they kept saying with JRA, I could grow out of it. So, and if there was a depressed time in my whole journey, high school would have been it, because again, dealing with all of those changes and being physically exhausted, I only had enough energy to go to school, get my homework done, and go to bed. And like my friends kept asking me to do things, and the answer kept being no, because I was so tired. And then they kind of stopped asking, which again, I get it. I get the high school brain and all that stuff, being a teenager. And it was a lonely time. And I think I got in my own head at that point. Everything I used to be able to do, like, crashed. And I used to be a competitive swimmer. I was a second chair flute person out of 30 flutes, and all that went away. And I had to give all those things up. And like my brother used to be able to, we used to play basketball, and like all that came to a crashing halt. But again, from the siblings' perspective, I am like, again, all of my chores got taken away and they got like dumped on my poor brother. So he was like getting pissed off at me, like, oh, the princess gets to sit inside. And I see Katie nodding. She's got two brothers too. And they don't get it either. My brother and I got to be really close friends at like adulthood, when we finally wrapped our heads around, what was really going on and all that, when he finally got out of his own, all about me, to like, wow, that really sucks what she's got. I guess I don't want to have all my stuff taken away and stuff like that. So interesting. It's just, it's cyclical. And again, any of that stuff, I have never been to a therapist at this point. At this point in my life, I don't feel like I've ever been depressed. I've got a huge support network around me, which I think is the bigger reason I'm not depressed. If I was living by myself and it was just me, I would definitely think I'd have more time to get into my own head.
And
right.
just the one final thing I would just say, it like in relation to that, is, what always comes to my mind is, and it's crazy, aside from all of the real stuff that we're experiencing, it's an episode of House from years ago. But there was an episode of House where there was a patient who had attempted suicide. And the reason he had attempted suicide was he had, some undiagnosed condition that was causing him such intractable pain that he just couldn't face it anymore. And of course, everybody tried to write him off as, well, he's just depressed, obviously. And House, who, for anybody who didn't watch the show, was a doctor who also lived with chronic pain. And so he was able to relate to this patient, and he said to everybody, he was like, listen, he's not in pain because he's depressed. He's depressed because he's in pain. And that just was, you know, like, I wish that we could just blast that all over every hospital, every doctor's office, everywhere that anybody could be seen, is to understand and not dismiss us because of that. We have a very, very legitimate reason, you know, to not feel so happy all the time. But even, you know, with that, it's just, you know, it was like this validation, this screaming point, and the thing, you know, for us to remember, you know, like Eileen said, that it is part of this. And, you know, it is just a reality. If anybody was living in pain every single day of their life, of course, they're not going to be thrilled about it, you know, and so it's just, you know, something to keep in mind. That validation for us, I think, is what we need the most. It's for other people to hear it, but for us to also hear it and have that validation.
So that's a great point. I'm going to actually pivot because we are 40 minutes in and we've got 6 more topics to cover. So I'm going to do my best to keep us on track to make sure we don't miss anything that we wanted to cover with you today. In saying that, I do want to mention the last debrief that we did. This word validation has come up many, many times. We covered a poster that a patient presented in the placebo versus nocebo, which was an amazing session. We covered that at the last debrief, so totally encourage anybody to go back and listen to that. But that validation study and feeling validated, that was a theme that came out through this entire conference. So a good example of, it's not just about pharmaceutical, it's also about non-pharma that we're seeing at these conferences. So when we say research, I think it's really a lot about research education when it comes to our diseases. So I'm going to jump forward in our scheduled agenda, because there is an extremely interesting topic that I want to make sure, if we do run out of time, that this one makes it in there. And that is about aging. There were 2 sessions in particular that was on aging, and it honestly threw me back a little. I went to one that was called Polypharmacy in the Elderly, and polypharmacy means when we're on a bunch of different medications. So I'm looking at the title going, a bunch of different medications in people over a certain age. That's what I thought I was going into, and to my surprise, it was so much more. And both of the sessions that I went to that were on aging really overlapped. And you do find that when you go to these conferences, that if there's a topic in one, they cross over in the research. So I'm blending both of these in. It's not going to be just a straight out report for each of them, but I'm going to hit some of the highlights. One of the things in both of these sessions was they were talking about 2 subsets. So this is actually relevant to everybody who's listening here, everybody on the panel, everybody not on the panel, because guess what? We're all aging. We can't get away from it. We're all aging. So they started the sessions by saying, we're talking about 2 specific subsets. We're talking about the existing elderly, and then we're talking about the to-be elderly. I was like, oh, that's me. I hope. I hope I make it that long. But essentially, what they were talking about is we have to think about 2 things. So we're talking about the soon to be or one day to be. We are the very first generation ever who has had the possibility of being treated with biologics and these disease modifying medications from childhood to elderly. Nobody else has gone through this. So they are starting to do research on, well, what's going to happen to us? Because we are going to have natural aging that happens. We're going to have loss of bone density. There's a chance for osteoarthritis and all types of heart disease, and those things that come naturally with aging. But guess what? Our diseases, we have a higher risk of developing comorbidities, including heart disease. Like we have a 20% increase of heart disease just by being diagnosed if we don't get our inflammation under control. Okay, so this is very important to understand, because the researchers are saying, hey, we have a whole population that's moving into this level. What are we going to do? We have biologics that could, the side effects can increase risk of cancer. Well, you automatically have a risk of cancer as you get older because of our immune system. So there's a lot of research into this, and it's the first time we've really been seeing this. So it means that we're going to be following this long term. This isn't going away. Whenever they kind of introduce something for the first time, it's not going away. It obviously not, because this is going to be relevant to all of us. The other part was the existing elderly. They have found a brand new subgroup. Rheumatoid arthritis, spondyloarthritis, psoriatic arthritis are the ones they mentioned, but we can probably safely say it would eventually be found in everyone, called, I think it's called late onset, older onset, my bad, older onset now. And that is anybody later 60s to 80s that they are finding are now being diagnosed for the first time. So there is a little controversy, I'm going to say, on our part, because I think many of us have gone a long time. Kerry told us her journey with being that diagnosis. So you do have to have that question. Okay, are they really diagnosed for the first time, or were they just missed? And then there's stuff that they have to consider, like ageism too. We all say, oh, well, we've had this situation where you can't have this. You're too young. You're too young to have arthritis. Because average typical age for our diseases is adult 20 to 40. Any age in children, typical. We just saw it. Older onset means that it can happen at any age. But now there's an ageism issue too, where, well, you're too young. I mean, you're too old. So you must have osteoarthritis, right? So that is something we as patient organizations and people living with the diseases, I think that's an opportunity for us to really zone in and educate people on the word arthritis, and really try to teach people about this you're too young, you're too old, because that could help with expediting in detection. They're also starting to question, okay, if somebody has an onset at 80 or 75, how do we treat them? Do we start on biologics knowing that there's no clinical trials? The people 80 were not invited into clinical trials. So they're having to go back and do trials and research to see what's safe. So that's a whole other issue. Right now, they're basically treating with steroids, which I know, Lisa, you saw something on that. Which
yeah, and I found it
ethical issue, right?
Right.
So, you've seen these, so you weigh in.
So the one on that I saw, it threw alarm bells into me because of the prednisone as being the main treatment, or at least that's what I read into it. It read, I'm approaching old age, and it threw ageism into the into my mindset. If it's going to be, if they don't want us on it for the long-term side effects, why are they putting it on the elderly for long-term side effects? Not knowing, but the more sessions you went to, it added up that they were with the multiple drugs that people are on, biologics, and not having tested them, biologics weren't necessarily safe as well. And it's very interesting, I mean, diagnosis, not until you're old, like you said, because it took me, I had symptoms probably since I was 16, 18, and I was 42 by the time I got diagnosed, because I'm seronegative. So every time I got, it wasn't until diagnostic criteria changed that I could get a diagnosis. So how many of these people had it for years? but that concerned me with the giving a medicine that they don't want to give to the young to the elderly.
Yes, because there were a lot of studies we covered before where I think in debrief, oh, sorry about that, in debrief number 1, where they're trying to get younger people off of these steroids, right? So that is a form of ageism, really, but at the same time, what they're saying is we have to give relief to them, and we don't know if starting a biologic at age 80 is right. So there's this.
But
there's
it
just
also
this
had
concern.
to do with costs, and is it cost effective to give it to the elderly because they're with the
quality
of life.
adjusted life years, right?
Yeah, and if is it worth the expense to change their quality of life is basically at their age.
And I'll sort of put a pin in that, because we will have a breakout conversation about that. In just a quick little, what Lisa's talking about is basically value assessments, or you might hear them as health technology assessments, which I think is a weird name because it has nothing to do with technology. But it's basically different measures that are for health agencies, whether that's government or insurance globally, where they take a mathematical equation and they decide, if we treat you with this, is the life year, the expected longevity of you living longer because of it, and the quality of life, does that equate the justification for the cost? And what they're saying, and just quickly here, they're saying is that we don't know if it's going to increase your life. It actually could decrease your life if we give you certain things. And that's why it's not necessarily passing the quality test. So please sign up, and we can put it in the chat, aiarthritis.org/advocacy. If you sign up for that, I am giving personal education classes, a peer-to-peer, just like we're doing today, on educating about these type of topics, and inviting you to come and have a voice and stand up in legislation or things like that, wherever you are in the world, to fight for access and to make sure that these measures are not in any way discriminatory. So
I'm curious if they feel that way about that, if once you reach a certain age, the biologics and the medicines that we take now will be removed.
We don't know. And that's
so,
why,
you hit 70 and you can't take meds anymore.
Exactly. And so I wanted to kind of wrap this loop up with a couple of things, a couple of points, and that sort of falls right into that, Lisa. We have been seeing so much research in the last few years on remission, prevention, getting patients off of medications. Tell me that doesn't tie into this. We were just excited that there are studies showing, okay, really what has happened is, and I'm not going to go into this completely because there are videos of me talking about this in the last debrief, so we can link to it, but essentially the treatment protocols have changed over the years. What happened in the 1980s and the 1990s, then we started with lifestyle, then we moved to the 2000 to 2010 is when we started what's called Treat to Target, which you sort of heard Cristina talk about in regards to personalized therapy, where they were taking a treatment, they were checking back, they were taking something and checking back. We often hear that Treat to Target in pharma, in your biologic. Try this, we're going to check back in 3 months, alter. So it's the same kind of thing. And then what happened was Treat to Target is working. So we're starting to do, the last 5 years or 6 years, they're doing research to say, hey, if we treat early and aggressively, we know there's a higher chance of remission. So now they're having studies showing what happens if we pull patients off of biologics. Think about it. That equals what we're talking about in ageism, or not ageism, pardon me, in aging. Because if we know earlier, we don't know how long we don't know. If I'm 85, I don't know. We don't know if my body can still tolerate taking these. So that's all tied together. And I think that's a very good story and timeline and journey line, if you say, for all of us to really dive in and track, because that makes sense to all of us of how this is going forward. There's a lot more to say about this, but in the interest of time, good news, I did, after I attended this one in person, I went off to the side, I took my handy dandy microphone, and I did a debrief for 10 minutes. So I will link you to that, and it'll give you all the other information that I'm not able to cover here. Cristina, I know that you are going to have to jump off here soon. So before we have about a couple minutes left, is there anything else that was on our debrief list that you wanted to jump in and cover or mention before you head off?
No, I actually was very interested in knowing, getting a debrief on the fatigue session, because we still know that even despite biologics, that's an area that hasn't been addressed, or we still don't have answers, and it looks like the brain has to do with it. So I know Deb has some interesting information on that, and I don't want to leave without hearing about it.
All right, go ahead, Deb. Take it away.
All right. So I actually watched a session this morning. So I'm going to apologize because I'm looking at my phone because I took a lot of photos from my phone, and it was an excellent topic. And I'll tell you in a second what the name of it was. I'm going back. So it was called Fatigue, Evolving Biological Perspective. And the gentleman who actually spoke about it was Rainier Straub, S-T-R-A-U-B, and he is from the Division of Rheumatology, and he's part of Neuroendocrinology, Immunology, and Department of Internal Medicine at the University Hospital, Regensburg, Germany. So again, excellent topic. He's so well informed. I think the very first part that he talked about, and this was really complicated. It goes back to my dietitian days and my human physiology, where he talked a lot about energy and the brain, and where your body stores all these different things. It was interesting. He talked about the body's reserves of energy, and that basically it's broken down into, in your liver, you have glycogen, and there's about 5,000 kilocalories worth of energy there. You also have your triglycerides, which are also your fatty tissues. In your in that area, there's 500,000 kilocalories. So a lot of energy that is related to your fat tissue, and that's why we have our fat tissue. But it was funny, he talked about also our muscles have the energy reserves built in there. But our, I wrote it down, he called our muscles selfish organs because they won't give that up. They won't give those energy reserves up. So again, it was pretty interesting. So you're basically going from your adipose, which is your fatty tissue, and your liver, which has got the glycogen. Those are where the human body has extra reserves. And it talked about some examples of energy needs in the human body. One in particular was like your sedentary and your usual activity still accounts for 2,388 kilocalories. And he also had it broken down into your glycogen reserves too. But again, and then it went to somebody who was doing the Tour de France, and he said that is over 7,164 kilocalories in just that alone. So just interesting background information. He talked about where your body and major threats are. So you have your fight for life. That's kind of the predators that are coming after you. So you've got that reserves, that, and you've got food scarcity. So people are foraging. Where all that comes from, it's involving your brain. But infection and wounds, that is actually our immune systems. And he talked a lot about our immune systems. The two major independent energy consumers that control the amount of energy regulation that's going on are your selfish brain and your selfish immune system. And I wrote down specifically, he said that the immune system becomes very selfish in designating your energy needs, especially in autoimmune patients. And you have to look at all the different things with the immune system. You've got your wounding, he called it wounding, and infections, and the hierarchy. So he kind of broke it down into all the different hierarchies that are actually become part of that. And he talked about, let's see, I'm just kind of skipping ahead. The major signs and symptoms of chronic inflammation and aging, he said, was depression, fatigue, and sickness behavior. He called it sickness behavior. And what also starts happening is they likened it to you lose your appetite, right? And you have all these other things. I mean, there was a tirade of probably 30 things that are on the slide I'm looking at, but it was really interesting to see how and I keep saying that word interesting, Tiffany. We always laughed about that. I need to come up, we need to look at for synonyms of what another word other than like interesting, but it really, or fascinating. Maybe that I'll call that. That was Cristina. I like that. I like that, Cristina. But what our body typically does in the sickness behavior, so that is the autoimmune system kicking in. He talked about, malaise. So again, being tired and also having a queasy stomach, fatigue, loss of energy, feeling cold. So what your body is doing is your energy is going towards trying to keep you from shivering. And also there's the muscle and joint aches that go along with that, loss of appetite, which is also what they call anorexia, and anxiety and depression. And the one interesting thing that he talked about too is the one thing that he talked about, the prevalence of the body kicking into and needing more energy reserves was all of our diseases and what the prevalence was from highest to lowest. It showed the amount of fatigue in rheumatoid arthritis was at the top of the spectrum, and the general population was at the bottom of the spectrum. But it talked about over 50% of people have fatigue in rheumatoid arthritis. Psoriatic is just under there. JIA is right under there. It goes down.
What's the percentage? 50?
Oh, it was 40 to 50%. And then
90.
I agree with you.
I'll go back on mute.
And the reference is from 2020. So again, the amount of research that's happened in the interim in these last 2 years is way up there. But like psoriatic is 28 to 49, but then the general population, 9 to 20%. So again, just from the higher end to the lower end, it was amazing. But you throw in the influence of smoking, which is something that, again, a lot of people still choose to do. It also is a major increase in the amount of energy reserves. So it also decreases the quality of life. It increases your fatigue. It gives you more fragmented sleeping. It increases your anxiety, and it also increases your depression. And that's just one influence from the outside that we could all be doing. If we were smoking, you're making life a lot worse for you. So again, we've been hearing about that a lot too, is what the influence of smoking is on a autoimmune person. It creates lots of havoc. But again, I'm going to kind of skip ahead because I know as far as time goes, but it was he talked about, let's see, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Let's see,
I think Kerry also, there were other people who watched it too. So while you're skipping through, if they
Yes.
wanted to throw anything in there.
Absolutely. I'd love you to hop in. I just found just the different influences to our bodies is just spectacular. And the energy, the amount of energy it takes. He talked about there's many different kinds of fatigue too. Kerry, did you want to throw something in there quick?
Sure. Yeah. So a couple of things. I thought it was really interesting. I didn't have the total breakdown of like disease by disease, but looking overall at people with rheumatic diseases of any kind. So taking all of us kind of as a bunch, that we 60% of us have experienced fatigue versus it said 17% in the general population. And he also added in the depression along with that, which I think goes with so much. And again, with people with rheumatic diseases, he said 29.5%. So nearly a third of us experience depression, as opposed to 3%, he said, in the general healthy population. Just a couple of touches on some of the things that Deb had said, with that expenditure of our energy, and that, it takes this much, but smoking, makes it take so much more. A couple of the other things that, he added that affect how much energy we're spending or how much we need is, he said inflammation affects your energy expenditure, and we, aside from just us actually doing things, but just having the inflammation in our system adds to that. Poor sleep, he said, also adds to that. And, that's another one of the things that so many of us, we experience insomnia as part of our disease. We experience pain insomnia when we can't sleep because it just hurts so much. And, so it's like the same as not having an appetite, and then not, needing energy, but you've lost your appetite. And so you don't eat, which means you don't get the fuel that would help give you that energy that you need. And, in the same, the sleep factor, we can't sleep because of what's going on in our bodies. But then because we're not sleeping, it's not getting better. And I think, there's so much of that we see that it's just, this catch-22, and it's this cycle that is really, really difficult to break out of. And, Deb, I think, was starting to mention, different types of fatigue. And that was something that I found really interesting, is that he talked about there's motivational fatigue, which is where you just don't want to do anything. And then there's physical fatigue, which is where we may want to, but just we have difficulty performing physical tasks. And then finally, there's cognitive fatigue, which is, a lot of us kind of refer to as brain fog, where, we can't quite concentrate. And it's funny how that plays a role even in watching this session, because, you start watching and this is really interesting, but then, your brain just fogs over and you're like, wait, what? And, so again, I was saying earlier, one of the things that is great about having these to watch as recordings is that we can pause, go back, watch it again, just go back to the last, couple of minutes, whatever it is that we need, because that, I think I didn't typically think of brain fog as a type of fatigue, but, so it's interesting to see it that way. And then one other thing that I have noted is that he showed a bunch of studies where fatigue was shown to affect changes in brain activity and in rheumatic disease patients. And, so I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. Like you're connected. Yeah, so all the different, connections that you actually have in your brain are related to that. And it causes it talks about long-term effects. If you're fatigued for a long period of time, that causes volume changes in your brain, as well as connectivity changes. And all of those different things, there was a diagram that showed that, again, the sleeping problems, psychological stress, smoking, pain, and neurocoction and anxiety, all of those things are causing these connectivity changes in your brain, which can become permanent. Eileen, did you have a question?
Yes. When he was explaining the different types of fatigue that obviously made me reflect on a lot of the things that I experience. And I have a question for all of you because we live with a rheumatic disease that causes fatigue. And I was particularly interested in the muscle fatigue. Days that I have definitely overdone it or the weather's bad. I have days where even just walking, like moving my legs, feels heavy and stiff. Moving my arms, same thing. Do you guys notice that feeling as well every once in a while? Like, do you feel that heavy fatigue sensation in your muscles?
Absolutely. Absolutely. One where I'd say most often and most common with me is in my upper arms, that they will be, the way I've described it is, it feels like each of my arms weighs 300 pounds and it is just dragging and it hurts to lift it up. And I've had, for over a decade now where I have to take a break when I'm shampooing my hair because doing this, as long as it takes to get through this, it just hurts too much to have my arms up even that much. There are times when it hurts too much to hold my phone up, and it can get really, really severe. And it's something that I think anybody else would never understand, but you say it to someone else who experiences it, and it's just like that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, on those particular days that I feel that sensation in my body, I find no matter how much I nap or how many naps I get per day, like those days could be 3 times I'm napping and it could be by 10 a.m. I already need a nap. But there's another type that I was interested in that you spoke about, which was the brain fatigue, that caused by anxiety or stress.
Yes.
So one thing I notice whenever I go through a traumatic situation, that muscle fatigue also pops up again, but it's just like, I get really, really hyper anxious at first, and then I crash. Does anybody else experience that when they have like a traumatic event?
And that is from your fight or flight. And that is your adrenaline kicks in to give you a whole bunch of energy. And then you crash. You crash right after it. Because again, that energy production of that adrenaline rush. And that comes from all of the different, that's not the muscle, but that's the adipose tissue. So it's grabbing that from there or your liver. And that's where the adrenaline comes from. And it's from your brain. Like all these different things are constituted through your brain.
Yeah. And also, I think it also happens not even necessarily on bad or traumatic things, but also good things. Like I just had a fundraiser and I didn't eat till way late. And I was up actually until midnight doing something, which is extremely rare. I can even stay up past 10. But I was just like, I had so much like go in me.
Right.
But I wasn't taking care of myself, of course. It was everything I had to do. But then like I crashed and I flared.
I get it 100%. I know we need to wrap up, but the one last thing I wanted to say that there was 3 different areas from the research that he had done that kind of explain where the fatigue comes from is the DAS 28. There was 24% of that is explained through fatigue.
Can you explain what the DAS 28 is, or?
I think you would do a better job because I know it's at the top of your head.
It's disease activity score.
Yes.
And it's like, if you look at those charts with the big people with the big hands and the big feet. And so essentially it's just a few components. It's the doctor doing a joint count to see what the pain and the swelling. Then there's like the global assessment. That's you as a patient where you say, I'm feeling this today, I'm feeling, all of those add up. They all have a point total assigned to it, and it goes up to 28. So the higher your disease activity score, the worse technically you're supposed to be, but we all know that we don't get measured in just that. But that's where I think when we're talking about fatigue, that becomes, I'll use it, interesting, because it's got to be relying heavier on the global assessment score that the patient, and I'm guessing, I'm just by
No, I believe it is. Yeah,
it can't be just on joints, because
Correct.
then that wouldn't make sense with the fatigue. So there
Correct.
you go. That's what the DAS.
Thank you, because I'm definitely fogging today, so I'm
That's
very
okay. I just want to make sure to chime in.
explain. Yeah, thank you for that. The CRP, which is another lab level that a lot of our rheumatologists always are checking, our CRP level, which is also looking at inflammation in our blood, that is about 35%, like explained through fatigue. And the biggest point is pain. Our pain is explaining over 55% of our general fatigue is coming from the pain. So they talked about one of the major, it's, translating fatigue to the brain. So it's overriding our brains because of the pain that we're in, which is causing all this energy, like expenditure. So there was one other question that again relates to this. One of the doctors afterward was asking about, okay, so knowing all of this, and our focuses should be on creating better medications for pain specifically. He was asking, he was asking the doctor, what did he think was the best medications that could help focus on the pain itself? And he talked about our anti-TNF medications and methotrexate. Those two different medications in particular are more focused at pain reduction.
Actually, I'm surprised they didn't say JAK inhibitors, because they're actually
I'm surprised too, but again, that's
like literally known for pain reduction. And yeah, I'm sorry to cut you off, Deb, but we have to move on.
I totally get it. But that was the last one I wanted to focus on, because again, we're all focused on pain. So, and
it's going to give Katie a few minutes to tell us about the brain and inflammation session that she saw while we were at EULAR. But we only have a few minutes, which is probably good, because I don't know if you noticed, but poor Katie hasn't smiled one time since we've been on here today. She's very tired. So we appreciate her being here, and take it away, Katie.
Okay, so the title of the session, it was called The Effect of Inflammation on the Brain in RA. And it was Neil Bazoo, who was a rheumatologist. And I'm going to try to make it a bit shorter, but he was basically a lot about brains, of course, and using MRIs to study it and to figure out, causes and causation, correlation. He kind of noticed that people being treated, what they reported in the control of inflammation versus the rates of pain weren't aligning. So sometimes people were saying their pain was a lot better, but their inflammation was showing that it was still active in the early days of their treatment. So that kind of indicated that there was a difference between, treating pain and treating inflammation. So therefore, they started looking at the different MRIs, different parts of what they can study, what they can't study. He made a joke that as much as he'd like to, brain biopsies of his patients just aren't ethical and not a possibility. So I guess there was a lot that's kind of, I think he said preclinical studies as far as these different possibilities. Cells that could cross the blood-brain barrier, the vagus nerve being stimulated or being a possible conduit, and cytokines that could, again, cross the blood-brain barrier. Something bold signals in functional MRIs as far as how different parts of the brain talk to each other. The ones that are more pain focused versus inflammation focused. Trying to see if there was any kind of connection what they found with that. But they used fibromyalgia as a control group because with that condition, there isn't any inflammation. So it was a good kind of group to use as control. But then they also wanted to study that because so often people with RA also have fibromyalgia. So there's also a relation too, but in different ways. He said that they found a lot of correlation in different things that they're studying, but now they want to look into the causation. Is there any kind of proof that what's happening is actually leading to, you know, these different parts of the brain talking to each other? And again, he emphasized that a lot of these things are just being studied preclinical, that they're kind of ramping up into figuring out more of these details and what's going on inside people's brains. I'm trying to see, he kind of wrapped up saying that RA is a mixed pain state with many different causes of pain and inflammation. And that there might be different types of inflammation, like Kerry was saying, different types of fatigue. So once the different types can be identified, then they can be treated. You know, the interplay can be more thoroughly understood. He also compared it to as far as when you are sick and you get a virus, it's not just one thing, you're fatigued, you have appetite loss or sleeplessness. So he also emphasized the systemic aspect of RA, and that, like a lot of studies that use RA as kind of a baseline because it's so populous, that these findings can help other RMDs. That eventually they hope to use what they're learning here for all the different other conditions that fall under the AiArthritis umbrella. And then he also mentioned, as far as the vagus nerve, that there's been a lot of studies into that nerve stimulation on inflammation, but he's wondering if it's not the inflammation that it's treating, that maybe it's the brain and how the brain is processing pain and inflammation and fatigue.
Yeah, we did. We'll have to link to it. It was, I don't know which one. I don't know if it was EULAR or ACR, and I don't know which year, but it was, no, we have it on recording, is Deb was part of it. And there were a lot of studies that came about with what it's like, it called like it's all in your head. Oh my gosh, it really is. Because that's what we entitled it afterwards, because it was all about the pain and the brain and the fatigue and all of it being sort of intertwined, and essentially when it your body at some point, there's a crossover where when you feel pain, or the pain is actually in your brain first, and then it goes through these signals, and that's how you are actually feeling it. So it's how it's interpreted in your brain. And so that's why we're seeing a lot of studies too on how can we address pain through mental stimulation or through therapy, which kind of ties us right back to the beginning of our debrief today, because we were talking about coping and how that is all interrelated. And I also wanted to just quickly make 2 points when we're talking about pain with Deb, and Deb was talking about the different type of medications. That if you tie back to our debrief number 1 that we did a couple weeks ago, it was a lot of focus on pain and non-pharma. So a lot of the studies, because of the problems with prescribing opioids, there is a huge movement to find natural pain therapies, and that also ties in to this whole idea of the pain with the brain, and then other natural ways to address it. And then last point, when Katie mentioned about utilizing rheumatoid arthritis because it was applicable to other diseases, I'd like to always take the opportunity to point that out, because often patients, I will hear them say, gosh, everything's on RA. Well, there's a reason. And it's not because the other diseases don't matter. It's because it honestly is the easiest disease to study. It's plain and simple. It's the easiest to study. It tends to not like have like a lupus is very complicated. It can often have organ involvement in the beginning. For example, psoriatic arthritis, there's a big issue with, is it psoriatic arthritis or is it psoriasis? So there's a whole issue there with diagnosis. RA is the easiest, and it also is one of the easier to enroll into the studies. So it helps because it is easier to study and is applicable. So whatever is found there can then be built on for the other diseases. So it's not that you're not being studied, or don't think that, oh my God, everything is on in RA per se. There's a reason. So I do like to say that. We are down to 6 minutes, and I still have to talk about precision medicine. So if you have anything else to say about those topics, please, I'm encouraging you to say them in the chat while I'm talking, because I also want Kerry to be able to say a little something about the sarcoidosis, which session. So we will go probably a couple minutes over, but we'd also started 10 minutes late. So bear with us, and hope you can stay on for the remainder. So as far as precision medicine, it was everywhere. I mean, literally. And when I mentioned in the beginning, if you're just tuning in, precision medicine, we're talking about biomarkers, our own individual signatures based on our blood, based on our DNA, based on our genetics. It's all about our individuality and how our bodies are reacting to different things. I like to use the analogy of cough medicine or like cold medicine, because I'll swear like Theraflu's the best or whatever, and then somebody else will go, oh no, like Vicks is the best, and I'm like, no, that does nothing for me. So it's kind of along those same lines of, we all know there's no one size fits all, and that's the problem with diagnosis. It's a problem with matching treatments. It's a problem with side effects. It's just a problem. And that's why the promise of precision medicine is so amazing. And when we talk about biomarkers and identifying these specific proteins or these specific pathways in our body, the research is in our diseases now. This is very prominent in the clinical setting in cancer. And so they are leading the way, and we are right behind them. And I'm going to have, we are going to create a takeaway document to go with this as well. So there will be links to this research. So I'm going to give a very quick overview here. I have like 2 pages of notes, and let's see what I can do in about 60 to 90 seconds. So as far as, I'm going to give you some examples. Psoriatic arthritis, they were testing different responses to what's IL-16, IL-17. And what IL is interleukin. So for those of you who are familiar with biologics, that is a pathway. So they are talking about these specific markers, and they are stopping them. So they are showing that some patients get very high treatment efficacy compared to others if they're using a certain medication. That's why Kerry might be on something and I'm on the same thing, and it does something completely different, or any of us. So that's why you're like, this works for me, it doesn't work for you. So they are researching into that. They were also looking into, I just mentioned, it's very hard with diagnosis in psoriatic arthritis and psoriasis, because what comes first? It's like the chicken or the egg. We don't know. Like, as some patients have the psoriasis first and the arthritis doesn't come till later. Well, there's a treatment issue there. And it's really, we got to intervene early. They are finding different biomarkers. This is serological collagen biomarkers specifically, that is finding to be good for measuring disease activity, and also helping to identify if there's musculoskeletal involvement or arthritis in these patients that have psoriasis only. That's amazing. So that is all part of an example of using precision medicine for that. In Still's disease, they have identified, we're still in the interleukins and treatment reactions that are specific to a subgroup who has a very specific biomarker. 80% of those patients can experience severe reactions to certain treatments that are indicated for Still's disease. So if you have Still's, make sure that you check out our takeaway document. It's not to freak you out. Just talk to your doctor, and just be aware that there is a certain DNA sequence that if you're feeling kind of weird and you're having questions about this medication you're taking, if you're on it with Still's disease, just talk to your doctor, because 80% of people with a certain DNA structure have a less response or a reaction to certain biologic treatments indicated. There was a session about DNA sequencing and that was talking about matching our like saying, oh, Eileen and I and Lisa, we all have this one little strand that's sort of the same. And then being able to say our treatment history. Well, wow, you did great on that. You did great on that. And how awesome is that to be able to create subgroups? So I'm going to pitch, sign up for aiarthritis.org/AiArthritis Voices. That's how you really get access to everything we've mentioned today. And we are starting a brand new database. And those are the kind of things we are going to study in it. So, so just think about how amazing that is. But in order to do it, in addition to clinical trials, just being part of registries that are going to collect that kind of information and letting us kind of cross-reference, amazing work that we can do. There is also talk about using this, but we got to remember, once it gets to market, we have to pass through the Food and Drug Administration, the European Medicines Agency, which is called regulatory agencies, and that is also in the works. I'm actually going to a webinar tomorrow on how FDA is addressing precision medicine and access to these things and this data. I want to turn it over quickly to Kerry, who had some interesting takeaways from the sarcoidosis session, specifically about, there were some things on diagnosis and treatment. So go ahead, Kerry, take it away.
Okay, so just a very, very brief overview. As I said, sarcoidosis is an inflammatory condition that can affect any part of the body and or any system in the body, and also includes systemic effects for most people. A couple of the things that this was just called sarcoidosis. It was Dr. Robert Bachman. I've actually seen him a couple of times before, and he's just incredible. And one of the things that he has talked about, and Dr. Basu said in the brain one also, was acknowledging sort of the difference between what doctors are looking for when you come into their office versus what patients are looking for when we go to the doctors, in terms of they're looking at lab reports and they want to see certain numbers, whereas we are looking for relief of our symptoms. And so one of the things that, well, so first, before just getting to diagnosis of sarcoidosis, it's really a diagnosis of exclusion. So they kind of have to, go through all of the, this differential diagnosis of thinking, is it this, is it that, trying different things, crossing off different things. And ultimately the diagnosis, there's nothing specific and exact 100%. This is how you diagnose sarcoidosis. There is no 100%, you have it for sure. Basically what it is you're considered, there are different results that come back highly suggestive of or consistent with sarcoidosis. And, then they have a kind of a sarcoidosis diagnostic score, was the first time I learned about that. And basically it's a number that they kind of put together with a combination of lab results and biopsies and scans and clinical criteria based on also the symptoms that you explain that you're having. And with all of that put together, it's then considered that they'll say you have it, and so you're kind of living as you have sarcoidosis, but it's not 100%. And then coming to that treatment, because there is no cure, there are very, very few actual treatments FDA approved to treat sarcoidosis. There is prednisone, and there is Acthar, which is another medication that basically stimulates your body to produce more of its own natural steroid. And so either way, you're getting steroids, and that's basically all there is. Obviously, we need more than that. And so what they do is they treat to, this was something I found really interesting, Deb, that it's treatment is designed to reduce mortality and to improve quality of life. And those are the two things that they're looking at. And I think those are really two things that are we care a lot more about than, seeing what your ESR number is. And so that, is important for them to acknowledge. And he talked, like I said, it can affect any part of the body, but rheumatology, it affects, he talked very, very briefly about how it affects, about the rheumatological presentation. And he said basically that it's very similar to RA, which makes sense considering, I went through years of, and a lot of other patients do, them thinking that that's what it was and treating with the things that they use to treat RA. But then even once they found out that it was sarcoidosis, a lot of the other, the treatments that we use are the same ones that they use for, other arthritis, AiArthritis conditions, like hydroxychloroquine and Remicade, methotrexate, Imuran, or azathioprine. So there's a lot of it is done in the same way because it has a very similar presentation, similar symptoms, and so there's a lot of similar treatment in that as well. And so there's a lot of kind of overlap with the AiArthritis conditions that we think of as the primary ones, and then how this is so similar to them.
Great job, Kerry.
I was trying to be brief. Being brief is not my strong suit.
You did a fantastic job. We have hit our time, and I am once again typing. Oh, Katie just beat me to it. I was just gonna type in again to sign up for. Katie, you've got to give us a smile before we hit. Just one little smile, please. There we go. I got to take a picture. Hold on. I got to get one picture with all of us smiling. Yay, smile. Yay. Okay, that's good. Okay, so we have sign up for our aiarthritis.org/AiArthritis Voices. That gives every opportunity that we have, from research to education to policy. You can fine tune what you'd like to sign up for and learn more about once you sign up for it, but it's just getting on the list. So everything that we've talked about today, that's really kind of, you can learn about Go With conferences, you can learn about the advocacy work we're doing. Everything lives underneath that program. So that's kind of the catch-all. I know we started in the beginning. I think everybody, I know Kerry, you did. Eileen, did you tell everyone where to find you in the beginning, or no? Okay.
I said chronic Eileen, so. Okay.
And Kerry, they find you where?
So you can find me Float Like a Butterfly is on Facebook, or Float Like a Butterfly blog. Well, yeah, the easiest thing is if you find me on Facebook at Float Like a Butterfly, you'll see links to everything else. Just one thing to note is I spell it. I'm from New York. I spell it like we say it. So it is BUTTAH fly, butterfly. Is how we say it. So you can find me there. Float Like a Butterfly everywhere.
All right, perfect. All right, and then you can find AiArthritis at aiarthritis.org. You can find us in social media, all our platforms. It's IF, as in International Foundation. So IF, AiArthritis. And we are on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn and TikTok. And I think I got them all. So please, okay, it's and YouTube, duh. And we're gonna have this up on YouTube, so you can rewatch it and share with others, and we'll have it chaptered out too, so that it's quick to go to different segments of what we were talking about. And that is a wrap for EULAR 2022. Next up is American College of Rheumatology 2022 in November. So make sure that you sign up. And again, you can just go to AiArthritis Voices, sign up for that program for free, and you'll get notifications of the opportunity to go with us again as we take on ACR 2022 in November. Thank you to all of our panelists today and awesome people who have been going with us. And if you have any additional questions about anything that you heard today, feel free to, you can email us. I think the new one is hello@AiArthritis. I'm used to saying info, but I think it's hello. And I see Katie saying yes. Is that correct?
You can either hello or info at aiarthritis.org.
Okay. Or you can message us on social media as well. And we have, if you go to our website under contact, we also have WhatsApp. or you can text. So, all right. Thank you all so much. And signing off from EULAR 2022.